Blood pumped through Beatrice Elliott's veins as she pushed her stallion harder than she ever had before, the distant sound of hoofbeats behind her driving her forward through the wild Colorado territory. The year was 1878, and she had been running for 3 days straight, stopping only when her horse demanded rest. Her once fine blue dress was now tattered and stained with dust, her dark hair falling loose from what had been an elegant updo. Everything she owned was stuffed into a single saddlebag, everything except the small Derringer pistol tucked into her boot and the pouch of gold coins sewn into her petticoat. The sunset painted the vast landscape in hues of orange and purple as Beatrice spotted a small valley ahead. Her horse was spent, and she knew she couldn't continue at this pace. She had crossed into unfamiliar territory, mountains rising in the distance like sentinels watching her desperate flight. Tears stung her eyes as exhaustion and fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed them back. She couldn't afford weakness now. When she reached the valley, she discovered a small stream cutting through it. She dismounted, her legs nearly buckling beneath her, and led her horse to drink. As she splashed water on her face, she caught her reflection hollow-eyed and gaunt. She barely recognized herself. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been the pampered daughter of Judge Howard Elliott in St. Louis, engaged to be married to Richard Prescott, one of the most influential businessmen in the city. That was before she discovered the truth about her fiancé's business dealings. Before she found the ledger hidden in his desk that documented the shipments of illegal weapons to violent criminals across the frontier. Before she witnessed Richard murder his own partner in cold blood when he threatened to expose their operation to the authorities. Beatrice had fled that night, stealing away with evidence of his crimes. But Richard's reach was long, and the men he'd sent after her were relentless. She knew too much, had seen too much, and he couldn't afford to let her live. As darkness fell, Beatrice made a small, sheltered camp beneath a stand of cottonwood trees. She couldn't risk a fire, so she huddled beneath her thin blanket, shivering as the mountain air grew cold. Sleep came in fitful bursts, broken by the slightest sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Dawn broke with a chill in the air. Beatrice rose stiffly and checked her horse, relieved to see he looked stronger after the rest. She had no clear plan except to keep moving west, perhaps to reach California, where she could lose herself in one of the growing cities there. Richard would expect her to seek refuge with relatives in the east, so heading west was her only hope. She had just finished saddling her horse when she heard the distant thunder of approaching riders. Her heart leaped to her throat. They had found her trail again. With trembling hands, she mounted and spurred her horse forward, riding hard along the stream to mask her tracks. The terrain grew rougher as she climbed higher into the foothills. Her horse struggled on the uneven ground, and Beatrice knew she couldn't outrun her pursuers forever. Ahead, she spotted a narrow canyon. If she could reach it, perhaps she could find a place to hide. She pushed her horse harder, ignoring his labored breathing. The canyon mouth loomed ahead, its walls rising sharply on either side. Just as she entered the shadowy passage, a gunshot rang out, echoing off the stone walls. Her horse reared in panic, and Beatrice clung desperately to the saddle. Another shot cracked through the air, closer this time. Her horse bolted forward, racing blindly into the canyon. Beatrice had lost control, could only hang on and pray as the animal careened through the narrow passage. Branches whipped at her face, rocks scattered beneath thundering hooves. When the canyon widened into a small clearing, her horse stumbled. Beatrice was thrown forward, hitting the ground hard. Pain exploded in her shoulder, and the world spun around her. She rolled to a stop against a fallen log, the breath knocked from her lungs. Her horse had disappeared, continuing on without her. She could hear the shouts of men in the distance, growing closer. With a groan, Beatrice pulled herself to her feet. Her shoulder screamed in pain, but nothing seemed broken. She had to keep moving. She stumbled forward, leaving the clearing for the cover of the trees that bordered it. The forest grew dense, providing better concealment. Beatrice pushed through underbrush, ignoring the scratches of thorns against her skin. The sounds of pursuit seemed to fade slightly, giving her a spark of hope. As she crested a small rise, Beatrice froze. Ahead of her, smoke rose from a chimney. A small cabin stood in a clearing, with a corral containing several horses to one side. Someone lived here, deep in this wilderness. Her mind raced. Should she approach? Whoever lived there might help her, or might turn her over to Richard's men for a reward. But she was exhausted, injured, and without her horse. She had little choice. Taking a deep breath, Beatrice gathered her remaining courage and moved toward the cabin. She had nearly reached the edge of the clearing when a voice behind her made her blood run cold. "That's far enough, miss." Beatrice whirled around, nearly losing her balance. Standing a few yards away was a tall man with broad shoulders, a rifle held casually in his hands. He wore buckskin trousers and a worn cotton shirt, with a battered hat shadowing his face. His stance was relaxed, but she could tell he was ready to move in an instant if needed. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I was just running from something," he finished for her. "Or someone." His voice was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. As he stepped closer, she could see his face better, strong jaw darkened with stubble, keen gray eyes that missed nothing, and a scar that ran along his right temple. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so. "I don't mean any harm," Beatrice said, backing away slightly. "I lost my horse, and you're hurt." It wasn't a question. His gaze had fixed on her torn sleeve, where blood had begun to seep through the fabric. "It's nothing." He studied her for a long moment, then lowered his rifle slightly. "Those men in the canyon, they after you?" Beatrice hesitated, then nodded slowly. "How many?" "3, at least," she whispered. "They've been tracking me for days." The man nodded, as if coming to a decision. "Name's Hunter Reed. This is my place." He gestured toward the cabin with his chin. "You'd better come inside before those fellows decide to check this direction." Beatrice hesitated. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." A faint smile touched his lips. "Let's just say I've got a problem with men who chase women through the wilderness." He turned and started toward the cabin, then glanced back when she didn't follow. "You coming? Or would you rather take your chances with those fellows?" Put that way, Beatrice had little choice. She followed him across the clearing to the cabin. It was solidly built of rough-hewn logs, with a small porch across the front. Hunter pushed open the door and stepped aside to let her enter. The interior was simple but well kept. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cook stove nearby. A wooden table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and a bed with a colorful quilt stood in one corner. Shelves lined with books and supplies covered another wall. Everything was orderly and clean, surprising her. "Sit," Hunter said, nodding toward a chair. "Let me look at that shoulder." "It's just a scratch," Beatrice protested, but she sank gratefully into the chair. Hunter set his rifle beside the door, then moved to a cupboard, removing a tin box. "You've been bleeding for a while. That's more than a scratch." He placed the box on the table and opened it, revealing bandages and small bottles. "What's your name?" She hesitated, considering a lie, but something in his steady gaze made her answer truthfully. "Beatrice. Beatrice Elliott." "Well, Miss Elliott, you're a long way from anywhere." He poured water from a pitcher into a basin and brought it to the table. "That dress was expensive once. You're not from these parts." Beatrice stiffened. "What makes you think that?" Hunter gave her a pointed look as he dampened a cloth. "Those shoes weren't made for Western trails, and you've got the look of city folk. St. Louis, maybe? Or further east?" "St. Louis," she admitted reluctantly. "How did you—" "I've been around." He gestured to her shoulder. "Need to see the wound. Can you manage the sleeve, or do you need help?" Heat rushed to Beatrice's cheeks. The impropriety of the situation suddenly struck her full force. She was alone in a cabin with a strange man, miles from civilization. Hunter seemed to read her thoughts. "I won't touch you more than necessary, madam. But that shoulder needs tending." After a moment's hesitation, Beatrice nodded. She fumbled with the buttons at the front of her dress, but couldn't easily reach the ones at her shoulder with her injured arm. Hunter stepped forward and, with surprising gentleness, helped her ease the sleeve down just enough to expose the wound without compromising her modesty. A deep gash ran across her upper arm, still oozing blood. Hunter frowned as he examined it. "How'd this happen?" "When my horse threw me. I hit something, a rock or broken branch, maybe." He nodded, then began cleaning the wound with the cloth. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so weathered and strong. "You're lucky. It's deep, but clean. No signs of festering yet." Beatrice bit her lip against the sting as he worked. Thank you for helping me, Mr. Reed. Hunter, he corrected. Out here, formalities don't mean much. He applied a salve from one of the bottles, then began bandaging her arm with efficient movements. Now, want to tell me why 3 men are so intent on catching you that they'd follow you into these mountains? Beatrice looked away, watching the flames in the fireplace. It's complicated. Most things worth running from are. He finished tying off the bandage and stepped back. You don't have to tell me. But if I'm harboring you, I'd like to know what I'm getting into. She met his eyes then, searching for any sign of deception or threat. She found none, just a steady gaze that seemed to see right through her pretenses. I witnessed a murder, she said finally. And I have proof of other crimes that would ruin a powerful man. He wants me silenced. Hunter nodded, unsurprised. And this powerful man, he's the one who sent those riders. Yes. His name is Richard Prescott. He's a businessman in St. Louis, but his real business is supplying weapons to outlaws. The words came easier now that she'd started. He was my fiancé. That earned her a raised eyebrow. Former fiancé, I'm guessing. Despite everything, a small smile touched Beatrice's lips. Yes, very former. Hunter returned to the cupboard, replacing his medical supplies. You must have been planning to go to the law with what you know. I was, she admitted. But Richard has connections everywhere. When I tried to speak with a marshal in Kansas City, I was nearly captured. I've been running ever since, trying to reach somewhere beyond Richard's influence. Hunter was quiet for a moment, then said, You're welcome to rest here until you're stronger. Those men won't find this place easily. Why are you helping me? Beatrice asked again. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Let's just say I understand what it's like to be hunted. Before she could question him further, a sound outside caught his attention. In an instant, the relaxed demeanor vanished, replaced by alert wariness. He moved to the window, careful to stay to one side as he peered out. Your pursuers are persistent, he said quietly. They've picked up your trail. Fear clutched at Beatrice's heart. I'm sorry. I've brought trouble to your door. Hunter moved to retrieve his rifle. Stay here. Don't make a sound. What are you going to do? Have a conversation. His voice had gone hard, one way or another. Before she could protest, Hunter slipped out the door, closing it silently behind him. Beatrice rose from the chair, moving to the window. She could see 3 riders approaching the clearing, moving cautiously. She recognized them immediately, Richard's men, led by his brutal foreman, Marcus Slater. They had tracked her all the way from St. Louis, and they wouldn't stop until they found her. From her position, she couldn't see where Hunter had gone. The men dismounted at the edge of the clearing, and Slater gestured for the others to spread out. He approached the cabin directly, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Hello, the cabin. Slater called out. Anyone home? Silence answered him. He took another step forward. I said, is anyone home? He repeated, louder this time. We're looking for a woman who might have passed this way. Dark hair, blue dress. She's wanted for theft in St. Louis. Beatrice's hand tightened on the window frame. Theft. Of course Richard would invent such a charge to justify pursuing her. Movement at the corner of the clearing caught her eye. Hunter had circled around and now stood behind the 3 men, his rifle aimed steadily. That's close enough, Hunter's voice rang out. The 3 men froze, then slowly turned. Slater's hand hovered near his gun, but he didn't draw. This doesn't concern you, mister, Slater said. We're after a fugitive, a woman who stole valuable property from her employer. We're authorized to bring her back. Is that so? Hunter's tone was conversational, but his rifle didn't waver. Seems strange for 3 armed men to chase one woman all the way into these mountains for simple theft. The property is very valuable, Slater insisted. Look, we don't want trouble. Just tell us if you've seen her, and we'll be on our way. Hunter took a step forward. Haven't seen any woman. But I have seen men like you before, the kind who track someone who can't defend themselves, the kind who shoot at an unarmed person from behind. Slater's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, friend. The woman we're after is dangerous and deceitful. She'll tell you any lie to save herself. Maybe. Hunter shrugged. But right now, the only danger I see is 3 armed men trespassing on my property. One of the other men shifted nervously. Marcus, maybe we should move on. Check further up the canyon. Slater ignored him, his eyes fixed on Hunter. You're harboring her, aren't you? Where is she? I've told you I haven't seen any woman, Hunter replied evenly. Now I'm telling you to get back on your horses and ride away from here. Or what? Slater challenged. It's 3 against 1. True, Hunter acknowledged. But I've got the first shot, and I don't miss. His voice hardened. And I don't much like men who chase women through the wilderness with guns. The tension stretched between them for a long moment. Then Slater backed down, lifting his hand slightly. All right, we'll go. But this isn't over. For today, it is, Hunter replied. Slater jerked his head at his companions, and they slowly backed toward their horses, keeping their eyes on Hunter. As they mounted, Slater called out, We'll be watching this place. When she shows herself, and she will be waiting. Hunter didn't respond, just kept his rifle trained on them as they rode away. Only when they had disappeared back down the canyon did he lower his weapon and return to the cabin. Beatrice was standing in the middle of the room, trembling slightly. They'll be back, she said. They won't give up. I know. Hunter set his rifle down and moved to the stove, where a pot of coffee had been warming. He poured 2 cups and offered one to Beatrice. But they'll be careful now. They know this place is defended. She accepted the cup, wrapping her cold fingers around it gratefully. I've put you in danger. I should leave as soon as possible. And go where? Hunter asked reasonably. You've lost your horse, you're injured, and those men are still out there watching the trails. I can't stay here indefinitely, she protested. Richard will just send more men. Hunter studied her over the rim of his cup. This Richard, he must want you silenced badly to send men so far. Beatrice nodded. He's built his fortune on illegal weapons deals. The evidence I took would send him to prison for life, maybe even the gallows. And where is this evidence now? She touched her bodice instinctively, then realized her mistake when Hunter's eyes followed the movement. Safe, she said evasively. A faint smile touched his lips. Smart woman. He set down his cup and moved to a chest in the corner of the room. Opening it, he removed several items: a worn but clean shirt, a pair of trousers, and a belt. These will be too big, but they'll be easier to move in than that dress if you need to run again. Beatrice stared at the clothing. You want me to dress as a man? I want you to survive, Hunter corrected. And out here, practicality trumps propriety. Those men are looking for a woman in a blue dress. She couldn't argue with his logic. With a nod, she accepted the clothing. Hunter pointed to a screen in the corner. You can change behind there. I'll step outside and check on the horses. Once alone, Beatrice quickly changed out of her ruined dress. The shirt and trousers were indeed too large, but she rolled up the sleeves and cuffs and cinched the belt tight around her waist. The fabric was soft from wear and smelled of pine and smoke. Hunter's scent. She found it oddly comforting. When Hunter returned, he paused in the doorway, his gaze sweeping over her. Something flickered in his eyes: surprise, perhaps, or something else she couldn't name. Better, he said simply. Now you look like you belong in these mountains. Beatrice smoothed her hands over the unfamiliar trousers. I've never worn men's clothing before. First time for everything. He moved to the fireplace and added another log to the flames. You should eat, then rest. Your shoulder needs time to heal. And then what? She asked. I can't stay here forever. Hunter turned to face her. No, you can't. But you can stay until we figure out how to get you safely to someone who can help. He gestured to the table, where he'd laid out a simple meal of beans, dried venison, and biscuits. Eat. Things always look clearer on a full stomach. Hunger overcame Beatrice's remaining hesitation. She sat at the table and began to eat, surprised by how delicious the simple food tasted after days of barely eating. Hunter joined her, and they ate in companionable silence. As the day wore on, exhaustion caught up with Beatrice. Hunter insisted she take his bed while he spread a bedroll near the fire. Despite her protests, she was asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. She woke to darkness, momentarily disoriented. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. Hunter sat beside it, his profile outlined in the golden light, carving something from a piece of wood. He looked up as she stirred. It's just past midnight, he said softly. You should go back to sleep. Beatrice sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. I've been sleeping for hours. You must be tired too. He shrugged. I'm used to keeping watch. Why do you live out here alone? She asked, curious about this man who had risked himself to help her without question. Hunter's hands stilled on his carving. It's peaceful. No one asking questions or making demands. That's not an answer. A faint smile touched his lips. No, it's not. He set aside his carving and leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. I was a lawman once in West Texas. Made some enemies. One of them killed my wife. Beatrice's breath caught. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. His voice was even, but she could hear the pain beneath it. I tracked him up through the territories. Finally caught up with him in Denver. He didn't live to stand trial. And then you came here. Hunter nodded. Needed somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could hear myself think again. Beatrice understood then why he had helped her. He knew what it was to be hunted, to lose everything. Thank you, she said softly. Not just for helping me, but for telling me that. He looked up, meeting her eyes across the dim room. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Get some more rest, he said finally. Tomorrow we need to plan our next move. Beatrice lay back down, but sleep was slower to return this time. She was acutely aware of Hunter's presence across the room, of his steady breathing and occasional movement. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe, and that realization was both comforting and unsettling. Morning brought gray skies and the promise of rain. Hunter was already up when Beatrice awoke, preparing a breakfast of cornmeal mush and strong coffee. They ate as they discussed options. The nearest town is Silverdale, about 2 days' ride, Hunter explained. There's a marshal there who's honest. I knew him back in my lawman days. He might help you get word to the federal authorities. Richard's influence reaches far, Beatrice warned. He has connections in the territorial government. Jeb Howard doesn't take bribes, and he doesn't scare easy. Hunter poured more coffee into her cup. But getting you there safely is the challenge. Those men will be watching the trails. Could we go another way? A route they wouldn't expect? Hunter considered this. There's a path through the high country. It's rough going, but it cuts a day off the journey and avoids the main trails. I can handle rough terrain, Beatrice assured him. I grew up riding in St. Louis parks, but I'm a fast learner. A smile tugged at Hunter's mouth. Parks are a far cry from mountain paths, Miss Elliott. Beatrice, she corrected. If I'm to call you Hunter, then you should use my given name. His smile widened slightly. Beatrice, then. They spent the day preparing for the journey. Hunter showed her how to load and fire his spare revolver, a Navy Colt that felt heavy and awkward in her hands at first. He was a patient teacher, correcting her grip and stance until she could hit the targets he set up behind the cabin. Not bad, he admitted after she put 3 shots into a knot on a pine tree. You've got a steady hand. My father taught me to shoot a derringer when I was 16, she explained. He said every woman should know how to protect herself. Smart man, your father. He was. Sadness tinged her voice. He died last year. If he were still alive, none of this would have happened. Richard never would have dared. Hunter was quiet for a moment. Tell me about him, your father. As they continued their preparations, Beatrice found herself sharing stories about her father, the respected judge who had raised her alone after her mother died in childbirth. She spoke of his integrity, his keen mind, and his quiet determination to see justice done. In turn, Hunter shared more about his own past, his years as a Texas Ranger, the cases he'd solved, the life he'd built and lost. By the time evening fell, Beatrice felt she knew Hunter Reed better than she had known most people in her life in St. Louis. There was a directness to him, an honesty that had been missing in the polite society she'd grown up in. As they sat by the fire after supper, Hunter spread a rough map on the table between them. We'll leave at first light, he said, tracing a route with his finger. Take the north fork of the stream, then climb to this ridge. From there, we follow the high country until we drop down into Silverdale from the east. What about Slater and his men? They'll expect us to head west toward the main trail, Hunter said. Going north will buy us time. But we'll need to be careful. They might have split up to watch different approaches. Beatrice studied the map, memorizing the landmarks Hunter pointed out. And when we reach Silverdale, what then? Hunter's eyes met hers. Then we get your evidence to Marshal Howard and let the law take over. And if the law fails? It was a fear that had haunted her since she'd fled St. Louis, that even with evidence, Richard might escape justice through his connections. One step at a time, Hunter counseled. First, we get you safely to Silverdale. That night, despite Hunter's insistence that she take the bed again, Beatrice claimed the bedroll by the fire. "You need rest too," she argued, "especially if we're facing a difficult journey tomorrow." After a brief standoff, Hunter relented. As Beatrice settled into the bedroll, she found herself watching him across the room, noting how the firelight played across his features, softening the hard lines of his face. He had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of his past. Yet he had opened his home to her without hesitation, risking his life for a stranger. In that moment, something shifted inside her. The fear that had been her constant companion since fleeing St. Louis receded, replaced by a warmth she couldn't quite name. Dawn brought clearing skies and a cold wind from the north. They dressed in layers, knowing the high country would be even colder. Hunter had found an old coat that nearly swallowed Beatrice, but it would keep her warm. They packed provisions for several days, ammunition, and medical supplies. "What about your home?" Beatrice asked as Hunter prepared to lock the cabin door. "You've built a life here. It will still be here when I return," he said simply. He patted the neck of the sturdy mountain pony he'd saddled for her. "This is Daisy. She's sure-footed and has more sense than most people. She'll take good care of you." Beatrice mounted, adjusting to the unfamiliar western saddle. Hunter swung onto his own horse, a tall chestnut gelding with a white blaze. With a last look at the cabin, he led the way toward the stream that ran behind the property. They rode in silence at first, both alert for any sign of Slater and his men. The terrain grew steadily more challenging as they climbed higher into the mountains. Pine forests gave way to rocky slopes, and the air grew thinner and colder. By midday, they had reached the ridge Hunter had indicated on the map. They paused to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hard biscuits. The view from the ridge was breathtaking, mountains stretching in all directions, valleys carved by ancient rivers, forests blanketing the lower slopes. "It's beautiful," Beatrice said softly. "I've never seen anything like it." Hunter nodded. "This country gets in your blood. Makes it hard to imagine living anywhere else. Even after everything, you still love it here. Especially after everything." He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowed against the sun. "Some places heal you, if you let them." As they continued their journey, the path narrowed, sometimes forcing them to ride single file along treacherous ledges. Hunter led the way, occasionally looking back to check on Beatrice. She kept pace, determined not to slow them down despite the increasing ache in her injured shoulder. Late in the afternoon, they entered a narrow pass between towering rock walls. Hunter suddenly raised his hand, signaling for silence. He dismounted, motioning for Beatrice to do the same. Leading the horses, they crept forward until they could see the other end of the pass. A rider sat on a horse at the far end, rifle across his lap. One of Slater's men. Hunter drew back, pulling Beatrice with him. "They've anticipated us," he whispered. "Probably have the other passes watched too. What do we do now?" Hunter considered for a moment. "We can't go back, it would take too long. We'll have to deal with him." "How?" "I'll circle around through those rocks," he said, pointing to a steep slope to their right. "Draw his attention. When he moves to investigate, you continue through the pass with the horses." Beatrice shook her head. "It's too dangerous." "What if he shoots you? You won't get the chance." Hunter's voice was grim. "Trust me, Beatrice. I've done this before." Before she could protest further, Hunter squeezed her hand once, then began scaling the rocky slope, moving with surprising agility for such a large man. Beatrice watched until he disappeared among the boulders, then turned her attention to the guard at the end of the pass. Minutes ticked by. The guard sat motionless, scanning the area before him. Then a sound echoed through the pass, a loose rock clattering down the slope, away to the left of where Hunter had climbed. The guard's head snapped toward the noise. He raised his rifle, peering intently in that direction. Another sound, closer this time. The guard hesitated, then nudged his horse forward, moving cautiously toward the source of the noise. Beatrice held her breath, waiting for the right moment. The guard disappeared around a bend in the pass, following the mysterious sounds. Now was her chance. Leading both horses, she moved forward as quietly as possible, keeping close to the rock wall. She had nearly reached the end of the pass when a shout rang out, followed by the crack of a gunshot. Beatrice froze, heart hammering in her chest. Another shot echoed through the canyon, then silence. Fighting panic, she continued forward, emerging from the pass into a small clearing. To her left, she could see the guard's horse running riderless into the trees. Of Hunter and the guard, there was no sign. "Hunter," she called softly, afraid to raise her voice. No response. Fighting rising fear, Beatrice tied the horses to a tree and drew the navy colt from her belt. She moved cautiously in the direction where the guard had disappeared, every sense alert. A movement in the trees ahead made her raise the gun. Then Hunter emerged, breathing hard but apparently unhurt. Relief flooded through her. "Are you all right?" she asked, lowering the gun. He nodded. "He got off a wild shot, but missed. He won't be following us." Something in his tone made Beatrice ask, "Did you kill him?" "No. Knocked him out and tied him up." Hunter took her arm gently. "Come on. We need to put some distance between us and this place before his friends come looking for him." They mounted quickly and rode hard for the next hour, following a deer trail that wound through dense forest. Only when they reached a small plateau did Hunter finally slow their pace. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. "We'll make camp here," Hunter decided. "It's sheltered, and there's water nearby." They worked together to set up a simple camp. Hunter insisted on a cold meal, no fire that might be spotted from a distance. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. Beatrice huddled in her coat, trying not to shiver. Hunter noticed anyway. "Here," he said, unrolling his bedroll and spreading it next to hers. "We'll share the blankets. It's going to be a cold night." Beatrice hesitated only briefly before practicality overcame propriety. They arranged the blankets together, then sat side by side, backs against a fallen log, sharing a canteen of water. "How much farther to Silverdale?" she asked. "If we make good time tomorrow, we should reach it by nightfall," Hunter replied. "But we'll have to be careful. Slater and his men will be watching for us." Beatrice nodded, then winced as pain shot through her shoulder. The day's hard riding had taken its toll. Hunter noticed immediately. "Your wound's troubling you." "It's just stiff," she tried to dismiss it, but Hunter was already reaching for the medical supplies in his saddlebag. "Let me see it," he insisted. Reluctantly, Beatrice removed her coat and rolled up her sleeve. Hunter examined the bandage, frowning at the spots of fresh blood that had seeped through. "The stitches are holding, but it's inflamed," he said. "I need to clean it again." With gentle hands, he unwrapped the bandage and carefully cleaned the wound with water from his canteen. His touch was light, but Beatrice was intensely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his body so close to hers in the cold mountain air. As he worked, she studied his face in the fading light, the concentration in his gray eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead. For a man who had lived such a hard life, there was a surprising gentleness to him. "Why did you really help me, Hunter?" she asked suddenly. "The truth." His hands paused briefly, then continued wrapping a fresh bandage. "I told you. You told me you understand what it's like to be hunted," she interrupted. "But that's not all, is it?" Hunter secured the bandage, then sat back, meeting her gaze directly. "No," he admitted. "It's not all." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "When I saw you at the edge of my clearing, looking so determined despite your fear, you reminded me that there are still things worth fighting for." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside her. Without thinking, Beatrice reached out and laid her hand over his. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for helping me, but for reminding me that there are still good men in the world." Hunter's hand turned beneath hers, his rough fingers intertwining with her smaller ones. For a long moment, they sat in silence, connected by that simple touch. The moment was broken by a distant sound, a horse nickering somewhere in the darkness. Hunter was instantly alert, his hand going to his rifle. "Stay here," he whispered, rising to his feet. He moved silently to the edge of their small camp, disappearing into the shadows. Beatrice reached for her revolver, holding it ready as she strained to hear any sound of approach. The forest was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the soft rustle of wind through the pines. Hunter returned a few minutes later, his expression grim. "Riders," he said quietly. "At least two, maybe more. They're camped in the valley below." "Slater?" "Most likely. They're between us and Silverdale." Beatrice felt her hopes sink. "What do we do now?" Hunter considered for a moment. "We change course. There's another settlement to the northeast, Pinecrest. Smaller than Silverdale, but there's a telegraph office. We can wire for help. How far? 3 days, maybe 4. He knelt beside her. It's a harder journey, through rougher country. I can do it, Beatrice said firmly. I've come too far to give up now. Hunter nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. We'll leave before dawn. Try to get some rest. They settled into their shared bedroll, lying back to back for warmth. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Beatrice. She was acutely aware of Hunter's solid presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Eventually, she drifted into a fitful slumber, her dreams filled with pursuing riders and endless mountain trails. She woke to Hunter's hand gently shaking her shoulder. The sky was still dark, stars glittering coldly overhead. Time to go, he whispered. They packed quickly and silently, then mounted their horses. Hunter led the way, following a barely visible trail that climbed steeply upward. As dawn broke, they found themselves traversing a narrow ridge, sheer drops on either side. Below, mist filled the valleys, concealing whatever might lie beneath. The day passed in grueling travel. The trail grew increasingly difficult, sometimes disappearing entirely, forcing Hunter to navigate by landmarks and instinct. By midday, they had reached a high alpine meadow where they paused briefly to rest the horses. How did you learn these mountains so well? Beatrice asked as she stretched her aching legs. Spent the last 5 years exploring them, Hunter replied. After what happened in Denver, I needed the solitude. Spent months at a time just wandering, mapping the trails in my head. You were hiding, too, she observed softly. Hunter looked at her sharply, then his expression softened. I suppose I was in my way. What made you finally settle in that cabin? He was quiet for a moment. Winter was coming. Needed shelter. Found that old trapper's cabin, fixed it up. Meant to move on come spring, but... He shrugged. Place felt right. And now you're leaving it behind to help me. It will still be there. He repeated his words from earlier. But there was something in his voice that made Beatrice wonder if he truly believed that. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain growing ever more challenging. As evening approached, they descended into a narrow valley where a small stream provided fresh water. Hunter decided they would camp there for the night. This time, he allowed a small fire, judging that they had put enough distance between themselves and their pursuers. The warmth was welcome as night brought a bitter chill to the air. They shared a simple meal of beans heated over the fire, and Beatrice found herself hungrier than she could remember being in her life. The mountain air sharpens the appetite, Hunter observed with a slight smile as she accepted a second helping. Everything feels more intense out here, she agreed. The cold, the hunger, the beauty. Even the fear. Hunter studied her across the fire. You've handled yourself well, Beatrice. Most city women would have broken down days ago. I'm not most women. There was a hint of pride in her voice. No, Hunter agreed softly. You're not. Their eyes met across the flames, and something passed between them, a current of understanding that went beyond words. In that moment, Beatrice realized that this man, this stranger who had become her protector, saw her more clearly than anyone ever had before. The realization was both frightening and exhilarating. They shared the bedroll again that night, and this time when Beatrice woke in the darkness, she found herself curled against Hunter's chest, his arm draped protectively around her. Rather than pulling away, she allowed herself to remain there, drawing comfort from his warmth and steady heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, she slept deeply and without nightmares. Dawn brought low clouds and the threat of rain. They broke camp quickly and continued their journey, now following the stream northward through the valley. By mid-morning, the first raindrops began to fall, soon becoming a steady downpour that soaked through their clothing despite their efforts to stay dry. The trail grew slick with mud, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through the most treacherous sections. Beatrice slipped several times, once nearly falling down a steep embankment before Hunter caught her arm and pulled her to safety. We need to find shelter, he shouted over the increasing roar of the rain. Storm's getting worse. Beatrice nodded, wiping water from her eyes. Her injured shoulder ached fiercely in the cold, and exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. They pressed on. The world narrowed to the few feet of trail visible through the curtain of rain. After what seemed like hours, Hunter spotted a dark opening in the hillside ahead, a cave, partially hidden by brush. He led the way toward it, checking carefully for signs of animal habitation before declaring it safe. The cave was shallow but dry, its entrance narrow enough to keep out most of the wind and rain. They brought the horses inside, unsaddling them and rubbing them down with blankets to ward off a chill. Hunter managed to start a small fire near the entrance, where the smoke could escape. They stripped off their soaked outer clothing and hung it near the flames to dry. Beatrice wrapped herself in a blanket, shivering uncontrollably. Hunter rummaged in his saddlebags and produced a flask. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "Whiskey. It'll warm you from the inside." Beatrice hesitated only briefly before accepting it. The liquor burned a fiery path down her throat, but Hunter was right. Warmth spread through her body almost immediately. "Thank you," she said, returning the flask. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rough from the cold and exhaustion. Hunter took a drink himself, then tucked the flask away. He added more wood to the fire, coaxing it higher. "Storm might last all night," he said, glancing toward the cave entrance where rain continued to fall in sheets. "We'll stay here until it passes." Beatrice nodded, too tired to argue. She watched as Hunter organized their meager supplies, setting out what they would need for the night. There was a quiet competence in everything he did, an assurance that came from years of self-reliance. As the warmth of the fire and whiskey seeped into her bones, Beatrice found herself studying him with new eyes. When she had first met him, she had seen only a rough frontiersman, dangerous, perhaps, but useful in her predicament. Now she saw so much more: his intelligence, his quiet strength, his unexpected tenderness. "You're staring," Hunter observed without looking up from his task. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "I was thinking about how much you've risked for me." "A stranger?" Hunter looked up then, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "You're not a stranger anymore, Beatrice." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond the words themselves. Beatrice felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of a truth she had been avoiding since that first night in his cabin. Hunter moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "We should try to get some rest," he said. "Still have a long journey ahead." "Hunter," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that something needed to be spoken aloud. He turned to look at her, waiting. She faltered, then found her courage. "I don't know what will happen when we reach Pinecrest, or after I send my evidence to the authorities. But I want you to know that meeting you, it's changed me." Hunter's expression softened. "Changed how?" "You've reminded me that there's more to life than the narrow world I knew in St. Louis. That sometimes the thing you're running from leads you to something you never knew you needed." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and brushed a strand of damp hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Beatrice Elliott," he said softly, "you are the bravest woman I've ever met." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. It lasted only a moment, but when he pulled away, Beatrice felt as though the world had shifted beneath her. "I shouldn't have done that," Hunter said, though he didn't move away. "Why not?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Because when this is over, you'll go back to your world, and I'll go back to mine." Beatrice reached up and laid her palm against his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingers. "What if I don't want to go back?" Hunter covered her hand with his own. "You don't know what you're saying. Life out here isn't easy, especially for someone raised in comfort." "I'm not afraid of hardship," she insisted. "What I'm afraid of is going back to a life where nothing feels real, where people wear masks and speak in pleasantries while plotting against each other behind closed doors." "And what about justice for your father? For the people Richard has harmed?" Beatrice hesitated. He had struck at the heart of her dilemma. "I still want that," she admitted. "I need to see it through." Hunter nodded, understanding in his eyes. "One step at a time," he said again, echoing his words from days before. "First, we get you to safety." That night, they slept curled together beside the fire, the boundaries between them irrevocably changed. The storm raged outside, but within the cave, Beatrice found a peace she had thought lost forever. Morning brought clearing skies and renewed determination. They set out early, Hunter estimating they could reach Pinecrest by the following evening if the weather held. The rain had washed away any tracks they might have left, giving them an advantage over their pursuers. The terrain gradually became less severe as they descended from the high country. By midday, they were traveling through rolling foothills covered with pine and aspen. The horses moved more easily now, sensing the end of their difficult journey. As they rode, Beatrice found herself thinking about the future, something she hadn't dared to do since fleeing St. Louis. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond mere survival. A life perhaps with Hunter by her side. They made camp that night in a small clearing beside a stream. The relative ease of the day's journey had left them both in good spirits, and Hunter even caught 2 trout for their supper. As they sat by the fire, eating the freshly cooked fish, Beatrice shared stories of her childhood, of the dreams she'd had before her father's death had changed everything. "I wanted to be a teacher," she confessed. Father encouraged it, even though most men of his station expected their daughters to do nothing more ambitious than marry well. "You'd be good at it," Hunter said. "You've got patience and determination." "What about you?" she asked. "If you hadn't become a lawman, what would you have done?" Hunter considered the question. "My father was a carpenter. I learned the trade from him. Might have followed in his footsteps if things had been different." "You built the additions to your cabin yourself," Beatrice remembered. "The bookshelf, the table, they're beautifully made." He looked pleased at the observation. "Working with my hands helps me think. Keeps me grounded." "Perhaps you could teach me," Beatrice suggested. "I've always wanted to learn a practical skill." Hunter smiled, and for a moment, Beatrice caught a glimpse of the younger man he must have been before grief and solitude had etched their marks upon him. "I think that could be arranged," he said. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound of gunshot echoing through the twilight. Hunter was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the edge of the clearing. Beatrice ignored the command, drawing her revolver and following him. "What is it?" Hunter held up a hand for silence, listening intently. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by shouts. "That's not Slater," Hunter said, frowning. "Sounds like a skirmish of some kind. Should we investigate?" He hesitated, then nodded, cautiously. "Could be locals defending against outlaws. Might give us information about what lies ahead." They moved quietly through the trees, leading their horses. As they approached the source of the commotion, they could make out a small homestead, a rough cabin and corral, similar to Hunter's own place. Several men on horseback surrounded it, firing at someone inside who was returning fire from a window. "Raid," Hunter muttered grimly. "Probably looking for supplies or horses." "We have to help," Beatrice said immediately. Hunter gave her a sharp look. "Not our fight, Beatrice. Getting involved could expose us to Slater. We can't just ride away," she insisted. "Not when someone needs help." For a moment, Hunter looked torn between caution and conscience. Then he sighed. "Stay hidden. I'll circle around behind them, try to even the odds." Before she could protest, he was gone, slipping through the underbrush with a stealth that spoke of years of experience. Beatrice watched anxiously as the attackers continued their assault on the cabin. She could make out at least 4 men, possibly more. A movement to her left caught her attention. One of the raiders had dismounted and was attempting to work his way around to the rear of the cabin. Without thinking, Beatrice raised her revolver, aiming carefully as Hunter had taught her. She squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it was enough to startle the man. He whirled, searching for the source of the shot, then dove for cover. The other raiders had heard it too, and several turned in her direction. Cursing her impulsiveness, Beatrice ducked lower behind the rock she was using for cover. She had given away her position without stopping the raider. Now she needed to move before they found her. A shout from the other side of the clearing drew the raiders' attention. Hunter had made his presence known, firing rapidly from behind a fallen tree. 2 of the attackers wheeled their horses toward him, while the others continued focusing on the cabin. Beatrice saw an opportunity. The man she had shot at was now caught between her position and the cabin. If she could keep him pinned down, it would be one less threat for Hunter and the cabin's defender to worry about. Taking a deep breath, she fired again, this time more carefully. The bullet struck the ground near the man's feet, sending up a spray of dirt. He returned fire, the bullet whining overhead. The battle became chaotic then, shots echoing from multiple directions. Hunter was methodically picking off the raiders, his aim deadly accurate. From the cabin, someone was returning fire with increasing confidence, now that the odds had shifted. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, 3 of the attackers lay motionless on the ground. The remaining 2 turned their horses and fled into the forest, abandoning their fallen companions. Silence fell over the clearing. Beatrice remained hidden, unsure whether to reveal herself. "It's clear," Hunter called after a tense moment. "Beatrice." She emerged cautiously from her hiding place. Hunter strode toward her, his expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. "I told you to stay hidden," he said, but there was no real anger in his voice. "I saw an opportunity to help," she replied simply. Before Hunter could respond, the cabin door opened, and a figure stepped out cautiously, rifle still at the ready. It was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Who are you folks?" he called, keeping his distance. Hunter raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "Just passing through. Heard the commotion and thought we'd lend a hand." The old man studied them for a long moment, then lowered his rifle slightly. "Name's Caleb Foster, and I'm obliged for the help." He gestured toward the fallen raiders. "Those boys have been terrorizing homesteaders all through these parts. Reckon they won't be doing that anymore." "Glad we could help," Hunter said. "I'm Hunter Reed, and this is Beatrice Elliott. We're headed to Pinecrest." At the mention of Pinecrest, Foster's expression shifted. "Pinecrest? You won't find much there now." "What do you mean?" Beatrice asked, a sense of dread growing in her stomach. "Town had a fire about a week back," Foster explained. "Telegraph office is gone, along with half the buildings. Folks are rebuilding, but it'll be a while before they're back to normal." Hunter and Beatrice exchanged dismayed glances. Their plan to send a telegraph from Pinecrest was now impossible. "Is there another settlement nearby with a telegraph?" Hunter asked. Foster considered. "Nearest would be Silverdale, about 2 days west of here." "We can't go to Silverdale," Beatrice said quickly. "There are men looking for us there." Foster raised an eyebrow at this, but didn't press for details. "Well, you're welcome to rest here tonight. Least I can do after you save my bacon." They accepted the offer gratefully. As night fell, they shared a meal with Foster in his small cabin. The old man proved to be a repository of local knowledge, having lived in the area for nearly 30 years. "These mountains have seen all kinds," he said as they sat around his table. "Outlaws, prospectors, Indians, settlers. Everyone looking for something: gold, land, freedom." "What brought you here?" Beatrice asked. "War," Foster said simply. "After Gettysburg, couldn't stomach going back home. Too many ghosts. Came west looking for peace." He gave her a shrewd look. "Reckon you know something about running from ghosts yourself, miss." Beatrice didn't deny it. Instead, she asked, "Is there anywhere else we might send a telegram? It's urgent." Foster thought for a moment. "There's Fort Reynolds, about 3 days north of here. Army outpost. They've got telegraph lines to Denver and beyond." Hunter nodded slowly. "That might work. Military post would be safer, harder for Slater to get to us there." "These men after you," Foster said carefully. "They law?" "No," Beatrice replied firmly. "They work for a criminal who's trying to silence me before I can get evidence against him to the authorities." Foster nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. "Well, if you're heading to the fort, there's a shortcut through Blackwater Canyon. Saves nearly a day's travel. Not many know it. Old Trapper showed it to me years back." Hunter leaned forward, interested. "Can you draw us a map?" Foster did better than that, sketching out a detailed map on a piece of brown paper, marking landmarks and potential water sources. "It's rough country," he warned. "But if you're being pursued, it might be your best bet. Few people use that route these days." That night, Beatrice slept on a pallet on Foster's floor while Hunter took first watch outside, insisting on caution despite their host's hospitality. She awoke before dawn to find Hunter already preparing the horses for departure. "Foster gave us some extra provisions," he told her quietly as she joined him. "We should reach the canyon entrance by nightfall." They thanked the old man for his hospitality and set off in the gray light of early morning. The day was clear but cool, a hint of autumn in the air despite the summer season. As they rode, Beatrice found herself thinking about what awaited them at Fort Reynolds. If they succeeded in sending her evidence to the federal authorities, what then? Would she need to testify against Richard? Return to St. Louis to face him in court? And what of Hunter? Would he return to his solitary life in the mountains once she was safe? The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. "You're quiet," Hunter observed as they paused to rest the horses beside a small stream at midday. "Just thinking about what happens next," she admitted. "One step at a time," he reminded her, but his eyes held a question. "Hunter," she began, not sure how to express what she was feeling. When this is over, a sudden crack of gunfire interrupted her. Hunter threw himself at her, knocking her to the ground as bullets tore through the air where they had been standing. They rolled behind a fallen tree, Hunter already drawing his rifle. "Stay down," he ordered, peering cautiously over the log. More shots rang out from the ridge above them. Beatrice could hear the bullets striking the wood and dirt around them. She drew her revolver, heart pounding. "How many?" she asked. "At least 3, maybe more," Hunter replied grimly. "They've got the high ground. How did they find us? Must have been tracking us since yesterday." The gunfight at Foster's place would have drawn attention. Hunter fired a careful shot toward the ridge, then ducked back down as return fire splintered the log above his head. "We're pinned down," he admitted. "Can't move without exposing ourselves." Beatrice looked around desperately, searching for an escape route. The stream behind them offered some cover, but they would have to cross open ground to reach it. The horses, she realized suddenly. They're still in the open. Hunter swore under his breath. Both their mounts were dangerously exposed, tethered to a tree at the edge of the clearing. Another volley of shots sent the animals rearing in panic. "I'll get them," Hunter decided. "When I move, give me covering fire. Aim for the flashes on the ridge." "It's too dangerous," Beatrice protested. Hunter gave her a tight smile. "One of us has to do it, and I'm faster." Before she could argue further, he tensed, ready to move. "Now." Beatrice rose to a kneeling position and fired rapidly toward the ridge as Hunter sprinted toward the horses. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet, but he reached the animals unharmed. He untied them quickly and led them toward the cover of the fallen tree, diving the last few feet as shots pursued him. "Got them," he gasped, pulling the horses down beside them. The animals were panicked but relatively calm, trained to respond to their riders in emergencies. "What now?" Beatrice asked, reloading her revolver with shaking hands. Hunter studied the terrain behind them. "The stream," he decided. "If we follow it downstream, the banks might provide enough cover to get away." A new voice called out from the ridge, halting their planning. "Miss Elliott, we know you're down there." Beatrice froze, recognizing the voice immediately. "Marcus Slater." "No point in running anymore," Slater continued. "Mr. Prescott just wants what belongs to him. Give it up, and maybe we'll let you and your friend walk away." "Don't respond," Hunter warned in a low voice. "He's trying to locate us precisely." "Mr. Prescott is very reasonable," Slater called when no response came. "He's even willing to forget this whole unfortunate incident. Just hand over the ledger, and we can all go home." Beatrice turned to Hunter. "He's lying," she whispered. "Richard will never let me live, not after what I've seen." Hunter nodded grimly. "I know." He studied the stream again. "We need a distraction." As if in answer to his words, a distant rumble reached their ears, not gunfire, but something else. Thunder, perhaps, though the sky remained clear. The sound grew louder, resolving into the rhythm of hoofbeats, many horses, approaching fast. Shouts erupted from the ridge as Slater and his men became aware of the new arrivals. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, confused by the sudden shift in the situation. Hunter cautiously raised his head just enough to see. A slow smile spread across his face. "Cavalry patrol," he said. "From Fort Reynolds, most likely." Relief flooded through Beatrice. "They found us." "Not us specifically," Hunter corrected. "But they're patrolling this area. And Slater's men just made the mistake of firing on federal troops." The shooting from the ridge had stopped. Through the trees, Beatrice could now see uniformed men on horseback spreading out around the clearing, rifles ready. An officer's voice rang out, ordering whoever was on the ridge to throw down their weapons and surrender. For a tense moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then a shot rang out from the ridge, but this time directed at the soldiers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The cavalry returned fire, their disciplined volleys cutting through the air. Hunter took advantage of the confusion to lead Beatrice and the horses toward the patrol. An officer spotted them and directed several men to provide cover as they approached. Lieutenant James Walker, United States Cavalry. The young officer introduced himself once they reached the safety of the patrol's position. You folks picked a dangerous place for a rest. Those men were after us specifically, Hunter explained quickly. They work for Richard Prescott of St. Louis. Miss Elliott here has evidence of his criminal activities and needs protection while she contacts federal authorities. Walker's eyebrows rose. Prescott, the weapons dealer. At Beatrice's surprised nod, he continued, we've had reports about his operation. Army's been trying to track his supply lines for months. I have a ledger, Beatrice said, her voice steady. It details every shipment, every buyer, every bribe he's paid to officials. Walker's expression turned to one of keen interest. In that case, Miss Elliott, I believe the colonel at Fort Reynolds will be very interested in speaking with you. He turned to issue orders to his men, sending several to secure the ridge where Slater and his men had been positioned. Within the hour, 2 bodies had been recovered from the ridge, neither of them Slater's. The patrol scout reported signs that at least 2 men had fled on horseback, heading east. Slater got away, Beatrice said, disappointment evident in her voice. For now, Walker assured her. But we'll alert all patrols in the area. And once we get your evidence to the proper authorities, Prescott's operation will be finished regardless. The lieutenant ordered his men to make camp for the night, posting guards in case Slater attempted to return. Beatrice and Hunter were given a place by the main fire, where they recounted their story to the fascinated young officer. Quite the adventure, Walker commented when they had finished. You're lucky to have found such a capable protector, Miss Elliott. Beatrice looked at Hunter, her eyes soft in the firelight. Yes, she agreed. Very lucky. Later, as they sat apart from the soldiers, Hunter asked the question that had been on his mind. What will you do after this, when Prescott is brought to justice? Beatrice was quiet for a moment, considering. I don't know, she admitted finally. I can't go back to St. Louis, too many memories, too many connections to Richard and his world. But I don't know where else to go. Hunter hesitated, then reached for her hand. You could come back to the mountains, he suggested, his voice low. With me. Her heart quickened at his words. To your cabin? To start with, he said. Though it might need some expanding if you're planning to stay. Are you asking me to stay with you, Hunter Reed? There was a smile in her voice, though her eyes were serious. I'm asking you to stop running, he said simply. To build something with me instead. Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from a sudden, overwhelming hope. I'd like that, she whispered. Very much. The following morning, they rode with the cavalry patrol toward Fort Reynolds. The journey was uneventful, Slater and his remaining men apparently deciding to cut their losses and return to St. Louis. 3 days later, they arrived at the fort, a sprawling compound of wooden buildings surrounded by a high palisade. Colonel William Harrison, the fort's commander, received them immediately upon hearing Lieutenant Walker's report. Miss Elliott, the colonel said gravely after examining the ledger she had carried so far. This evidence is exactly what we've been seeking. Prescott's operation has been supplying weapons to hostile tribes and outlaw gangs across 3 territories. The damage he's done is incalculable. Will it be enough to bring him to justice? She asked. More than enough, Harrison assured her. I've already sent telegrams to the federal marshal's office in Denver and to the War Department in Washington. Agents are being dispatched to St. Louis as we speak to arrest Prescott and his associates. Relief washed over Beatrice. After weeks of running, of fear and uncertainty, justice was finally within reach. What happens now? Hunter asked. Miss Elliott will need to provide a formal statement, the colonel explained. And she may be required to testify when the case comes to trial. But that could be months away. In the meantime, we can provide military escort to wherever you wish to go. Hunter's hand found Beatrice's, their fingers intertwining naturally. We have plans, he said simply. 2 weeks later, they stood once more before Hunter's cabin in the Colorado wilderness. The journey back had been peaceful, their military escort ensuring no further trouble from Slater or any of Richard's remaining men. News had reached them along the way that Richard Prescott had been arrested, along with several prominent officials who had accepted his bribes. The case was causing a sensation in St. Louis society. But that world seemed very far away now as Beatrice looked at the small cabin that would be her new home. Already, Hunter was planning expansions: a proper bedroom, a larger kitchen, perhaps even a small schoolroom where Beatrice could teach the children of nearby settlers. "It's not what you're used to," Hunter said, watching her face carefully. Beatrice smiled, turning to face him. "It's exactly what I need." She looked around at the mountains rising majestically around them, at the clear stream and the forest alive with wildlife. "This place feels like freedom." Hunter stepped closer, drawing her into his arms. "You can stop running now, Beatrice Elliott," he said softly, echoing the words he had spoken weeks before, though with new meaning now. "I'm not running anymore," she replied, lifting her face to his. "I'm finally where I belong." Their lips met in a kiss that held the promise of all the days to come, days of peace, of purpose, of building a life together in this wild and beautiful place. Beatrice knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time since her father's death, she faced the future not with fear, but with hope. And as Hunter led her into the cabin that would become their home, she knew that sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of a greater adventure. 5 years later, Beatrice stood on the porch of what was now a sprawling, comfortable homestead. The original cabin remained at its heart, but Hunter had added rooms as their family grew: first a proper bedroom, then a large kitchen, and finally a nursery for their twin daughters, Elizabeth and Hannah, now 3 years old and full of boundless energy. Behind the main house stood a small schoolhouse where Beatrice taught the children of neighboring homesteaders 3 days a week. Her reputation as a teacher had spread throughout the valley, drawing families from miles around who wanted education for their children. Hunter had expanded his carpentry work as well, creating beautiful furniture that merchants in the growing town of Silverdale eagerly purchased to sell to their customers. His craftsmanship had become renowned throughout the territory. Richard Prescott had been convicted and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Marcus Slater had eventually been captured trying to flee to Mexico and now shared his former employer's fate. The weapons ring had been dismantled, bringing a measure of peace to the territories it had once plagued. As Beatrice watched her daughters playing in the yard, Hunter emerged from his workshop, sawdust clinging to his shirt and hair. The years had added a few lines to his face, but his gray eyes still held the same steady strength that had first captured her heart. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just remembering," she replied, leaning against him as his arms slipped around her waist. 5 years ago today, you told me I could stop running." Hunter smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best thing I ever said." "I never thought I'd find this," Beatrice said softly. "A home, a family, peace. Sometimes you have to run from everything you know to find what you really need," Hunter observed. From the yard, little Elizabeth called out, "Mama, Papa, come see what we found." Hand in hand, they descended the porch steps to join their daughters, moving not away from the past now, but toward the future they had built together in this wild and beautiful land that had become their home.